Without further ado, I'd love to get this party started right and introduce our first speaker, someone who I've had the great pleasure of knowing for a few years now, Chris Fralic. So I'll read a little bit about Chris, but in case you're not aware, Chris works at First Round Capital. He's a partner there, and if you're not familiar with First Round, you probably should be, and you've probably heard of many of the companies in which they've invested. They're one of the premier, if not the foremost, seed investment, early stage investment companies in the world, investing in companies like Uber and Blue Apron and Warby Parker and many others to name. And so let me just share a little bit about Chris, and he's going to kick us off today as our keynote, so thank you again. Chris Fralic has been a partner at First Round Capital, where he's been since 2006, where he's led investments in companies that he's actively involved in today, like Warby Parker, Hotel Tonight, Refinery 29, and Roblox, and previously with companies like Furry, Invite Media, Demdex, and Ring, which has since been acquired by Yahoo, Google, Adobe, and Amazon, respectively. Chris has 30 years of experience in the tech industry, with significant BD roles dating back to 1996. He was the vice president of business development at social bookmarking and tagging company Delicious through the Yahoo acquisition. He was also an early employee and the vice president of business development at Half.com. And after the eBay acquisition, he spent 6 years with eBay in a variety of BD, media, and entertainment roles. Chris has attended the TED conference for over 20 years and worked with them in 2006 to help launch TED Talks, which have now been viewed over 6 billion times. So thank you very much, Chris, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, everyone. Chris Fralic.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here, and it's fantastic to be at an event that's focused on business development. It's been a big part of my career, but it's not something that there's a lot of books on or other conferences I'm aware of. And in fact, someone came up earlier, Prakash, I don't know where he's sitting over here, but he said he saw a talk I gave a little bit about Half.com years ago, and he said it was the first thing he'd ever seen written down on the subject. And hopefully today can start a conversation among all of us to build up what I think is a noble profession and a good one to be in. And today's topic is building relationships that span careers and decades, and how do they start with an email introduction. And it's really broken into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and sort of the paths that led me to where I am, and a little bit of a look back and a couple examples of business development roles and companies I've worked with. And then I'm going to talk about the big picture of, I think, like the why behind all of this and the mindset to think in the long term. And then getting into like specifics of here's, as someone who's for the last 12 years been on the receiving end of a lot of inbound emails, just some things I've picked up about what I think works best. So with that, I'll kick it off. So you got a little bit of my introduction. I won't repeat that. I've worked for some companies that people have heard of. I've worked for several that you've never heard of that have gone out of business. I was fired from that one, so that was not a career highlight, but a lot of learning happened there. And if you look at my, Twitter's a place where I spent a lot of time. I was one of the first 100 users. We weren't smart enough to actually invest. We thought it was too expensive at $20 million valuation. So you should take everything with a grain of salt that I say, because we also didn't invest in Slice. So we're not, we get it wrong a lot too. But Twitter is a place where you feel free to follow me. I spend a lot of time engaging there. I like it. And you'll see in my description, I talk about being a technology historian and futurist. And when I say I'm a futurist, what I mean is I sit down with little companies that just got started and try and dream with them and see how they might become the next Uber or Hotel Tonight or Warby Parker or Slice or whatever. And that's sort of peering into the future and pattern matching and thinking of what could things become. But I'm also a bit of a technology historian and tech buff, because I started selling computers in the 1980s. And just to give you a little sense of that, I collect things, so I'm a collector. This is my home office computer museum. So you can see, my wife is very kind to let me do this, but like things like the first Macintosh, the Apple Lisa, weird things like, does anyone know what that is? What? No? That thing right there? That's the sock puppet from Pets.com in 1999. That's the very first personal computer called an Altair that Bill Gates and Paul Allen wrote BASIC for and started Microsoft around. So that, you can see I have more. There's lots and lots more. This is kind of fun. That's Fortune magazine. It says the deal that made Bill Gates, age 30, $350 million. Does anyone know how much Bill Gates is worth today? Guess? It's like 50 or 80 billion. And that's all the public appreciation of Microsoft stock you could have bought on the open market back in 1986. I collect phones. Kind of many of these I've had. This is the Gordon Gekko, on the Wall Street beach one. There's somewhere in there is a Samsung Galaxy Note, the ones that blew up. They're hard to find. Does anyone know what this is? You can read it. But Juicero. So some of these things are fresh. So this is the $700 juicing machine. The company raised $110 million, failed. It sits very nicely above this corner computer from Packard Bell that for no reason was built to go in a corner. So anyway, so that's something that I've, just for fun, just to share a little bit of something that I'm interested in outside of work. But it all goes back to, I consider myself really lucky to have been around for a long time and seen a lot of waves of technology and been involved with a bunch of things. This is a punch card. When I went to school at Villanova in 1980, my computer class used punch cards. That's, you would, type in your instruction, it would put holes into pieces of paper, you'd hand them to someone who fed them into a machine, you'd come back later in the day and your printout with your computing results would be in a little folder. And I was on the tail end of that, but then the beginning edge of the personal computer revolution, which was really the first part of my career. But it's fascinating to think to go from, punch cards to PCs to the internet to mobile to whatever we're here today. And again, you're all much younger. You're beginning your career is just thinking about what you might be witnessing and being a part of as you go forward. Coming out of school, I keep all this old stuff. This is my resume in 34 years ago when I was looking for a job, graduating from school, and it was to obtain a challenging position in the field of marketing or finance. I really didn't know what I was going to do. The other interesting thing is this was not on a computer. This was typeset. You had to go to a printer and tell them what font you wanted and pay a lot of money to get 200 copies of this, and thick paper, and just a little history lesson of what it used to be like. But I ended up getting lucky and landed in the technology world. I was selling computers, got my first job, a whopping $15,000 a year base, $4,000 draw against unlimited upside in sales in the personal computer world, and I loved it. I was a natural at it, and I ended up spending 10 years of my career selling PCs, starting one at a time off of a retail sales floor, up to managing tens of millions of dollars in large accounts. At one point I sold Eli Lilly 3,000 laptops for their sales force. And again, collect everything. This is all my business cards from my whole career. And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like the sediment of or looking at a tree. If you slice it open, you could look, and see the life of it. But so this was my very first job in 1984. This is first round capital in venture capital, where I've been for 12 years now. And then a lot in between that sort of led me here. And again, part of the reason for showing this is to show how paths can happen and how connections can be made and directions set that can lead you somewhere. And they're definitely not straight lines. So this is the whole 10 years at 5 different companies in the personal computer world. And it's interesting, if you look back, it was right here was the first thing that was pre-web or email as you know it today. I had a thing called an Apple link address. It was a way for me to, Apple gave all its dealers and big customers this early version of AOL. And my number was c5866@applelink.apple.com. And no one had an email address. But I worked with KPMG, they were my customer, they were all on it. So I figured out one day I could go in and search for KPMG, and it came back with hundreds of people that were on this pre-email system. And I invented spam, basically. I sent them all an email saying, I'm your Computerland national account rep, and here's a price list, I'll send it out monthly. And I also unwittingly invented opt-out. I said, if you don't want to receive this, let me know. And 2 people didn't want to receive it, all the rest did, and it was this great channel to connect. I learned, I didn't invent spam, it was actually invented earlier by some other people, but I came up with it on my own. I didn't copy anyone in it. But it was a good early channel, but then again, it wasn't up until here that I actually had a regular email address that you would recognize. And you can see I used to carry pagers and beepers around. That was a good communication path. But I sort of saw the PC industry getting like its margins squeezed. And I didn't realize it would completely disappear with the likes of Dell, selling direct. But I knew it wasn't a great place to be. I was more interested in software and services, and that's how I ended up here. And then kind of in 1995 was kind of when the internet bell rang. Netscape went public. It was the beginning of the first internet wave and bubble. And I kind of made a mental, I don't know if I realized at the time, but I basically committed my career to the internet. I'm still in it today, and started on a path and spent some time at Oracle selling databases. I mentioned AOL. This is the failed startup. As I was thinking also about, I'm interested in venture-backed companies and venture capital, and there was very little information you could get about that. And I met a gentleman that I'll talk about in another slide who really was helpful in my path of understanding venture capital and venture-backed startups. And people that I met, so again, I ended up working for TED because I started going to TED back around here when no one had ever heard of it. And along the way, through some things, I met a guy named Josh Koppelman. And Josh was at another company in Philadelphia. We met, we chatted, we did some business with each other, helped each other out. And then one day I emailed him and said, on an issue, and he replied, says, I'm starting a new startup, selling used books on the internet. Do you want to have lunch? And we did, and that was my connection into half.com and kind of everything that's on this side of the path. So anyway, that's just a little walk through history, and I'll tell you a couple examples of business development efforts that I was involved in that I think were impactful and maybe worth sharing a story. So one is with half.com. It's 1999. The company was started in July. I joined in August. You could see we named ourselves cool things like Business Development Guru. We didn't have normal titles. We were too cool for that. But basically, we were a marketplace of used or more than half off books, movies, music, and games. And it's a two-sided marketplace. You need buyers, you need sellers. And we were going to launch in January, less than 6 months away. And my job was to get 1 million items in the store before we launched. And also to get distribution to some customers, and that people could see us and learn about us. And then also we had to build the technology stack. So back in 1999, it was a different story. You couldn't pull out your credit card and go on Amazon and be up and running in 10 minutes. So this is what our slide deck looked like when we were pitching investors in December of 1999, and this is the slide on business development. So I like this as a great visual of the things that we had to do to be successful to launch our startup. One of them was we needed inventory. We wanted 1 million items. We picked that number out of the air. At the end of the day we launched, we had 2.5 million. And through this process, I had to learn how do books get, if a book goes to Barnes & Noble and it doesn't sell, how does it make its way back and then ultimately get remaindered and sold as an off-price used book? Because we wanted to get a lot of that inventory into our system. And we had to figure out that system and find sources of inventory to get us that. We found some that were, this is a company in the middle of Pennsylvania that all it does is rent books to libraries who don't want to buy them. They would just want to rent them when they need them, and then they send them back, and they have all these books available, and we came up with them. We partnered with software systems for used bookstores that didn't even have an internet connection. They might have had a PC. I would fly people down to put a modem in their computer and get their inventory listed so we could get it onto our system. So we did a lot of work in getting inventory. We did a lot of work on distribution, like cutting deals with partners for growth, for access, for early affiliate networks. And then we had to build all the technology. We had to buy Sun computers. We had to license Oracle database. You had to build a database of products, search engines, all the pieces you had to put together. And again, this was done for under $3 million in under 6 months back in 1999. Another company I was involved in, literally right across the street on Broadway, was called Delicious. Anybody remember that one? It's kind of a poster child for Web 2.0 back in 2005. And I joined as like the 4th or 5th employee, and one of the Delicious is a social bookmarking tool. So for any individual, it was a better way to manage your bookmarks than keeping them in folders in your browser. It kept it in the cloud, and it was a collaborative thing where everyone kept their bookmarks there and described them or tagged them, and you could figure out what was interesting on the internet. And I think it was a big idea, but we needed distribution. We had just in the hundreds of thousands of users, and two deals that I was involved in really helped change the trajectory of the company. One was with Firefox. We cut a deal with Mozilla, and it was a handshake deal over a slice of pizza in Palo Alto. And the COO, a guy named John Lilly, who's an investor at Greylock today, said, "We like Delicious. Let us help you design a really good version of it for Firefox, and then we'll help promote it." So not only were they collaborative in helping us build this perfect, the best tool we could with all their advice and input, they even introduced us to the designer who made that Firefox so he could make our little bookmarklet button and make it just look perfect. We tested like crazy, and then we launched it, and they promoted it like crazy on one of their big updates, like Mozilla 2.0. I think they're on Mozilla 80 right now or something, but Firefox 80, but Firefox 2.0 was a big upgrade. Everybody did the upgrade, and then the first thing it recommended was Delicious, and it just 4x'd our user base just off of that. Another important, I didn't even realize how important it was at the time, but we were thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could get little save to Delicious buttons on the content itself so that people didn't have to think about it and have it pre-installed in their browser. And one of the first places we got into was the Washington Post. And after a few meetings and agreements, they agreed to put a little Save to Delicious button on the bottom of every piece of content on the Post. And at the time, the only social action button was print. There wasn't really anything else to do. And they took our button, and it went great. And what I didn't realize is the whole publishing and newspaper industry follows the Washington Post, and everybody wanted to do a deal. So we were able to, come up with a quick process. Again, I don't even think there was any signature. It was just they would give us their logo. We would create a little co-branded pop-up, and they would put the code in themselves, and it would pop up save this to Delicious with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then it would say and that was it. And it just helped spread Delicious. We ended up getting acquired by Yahoo in 6 months. So to wrap up sort of this first section, there's an article that I was part of that First Round Review put out last year. And in the beginning, I tie back to, in 1996, I'm selling software for Oracle, and I was introduced to a guy named Kevin Compton. And Kevin was a partner at Kleiner Perkins, which certainly, they're still a very well-known firm. Back then, they were the premier firm in the entire venture capital industry. And Kevin didn't know who I was, but I was interested in venture capital, and he took a 1-hour phone call with me and explained what it was and what he did and how he worked life and home and work. And how much money they put in, how they made decisions. He basically like opened up the kimono and shared what they did, and then kept in touch with me. Like when I'd go to California, he'd take a meeting, and you know, we didn't spend a ton of time, but consistent, and you know, he's been a friend and mentor over the years, and like just a super important connection that sort of helped me get on a path. And it was nice to be able to sort of recognize him for it and what he did in this article that was written. Another thing that I think sort of ties all this together is, again, one of my favorite authors and now a friend is Seth Godin, and he wrote an article last week called How Many Hops? And he basically talks about, like, sometimes you put in a proposal and you get an answer and it's a yes, or you put in, you know, you put in your resume and you get the job. But very often, you know, you do small projects, you write an article, you meet a person here, you go, and he basically talks about it's these hops that connect. And if you're walking around with a quid pro quo mindset, only giving enough, you know, for what you need to get back right now, you're going to miss out on a lot. And again, there's a ton of experience like that. Like, you know, was talking to Kenny Herman here today and realizing I met your brother Darren 12 years ago when he pitched me on a startup that we didn't invest in, but I liked him and kept in touch and got to meet you through that. And just like, you have to realize there's a lot of connections that happen over a career, and you have to be open to them and not look transactionally at things. So end of phase one. I'm going to turn it up a little bit now. So this next section is what I call like the bigger picture. Would be my suggestions, observations, how to think of your career, your connections, your brand over the longer term, and then it'll cut down into some specifics on like email outreach and best practices that I've observed in my career, both being primarily on the outbound sending side and then more recently on the inbound receiving side. So I'd like to start off with it's one of my favorite people, Frances Hesselbein. I've served on her board for years, and it didn't do very well, but the takeaway is she would say leadership is how to be. It's not what to do. And I think like when you're thinking of your brand, your relationships, it shouldn't be like what to do just because someone told you. It should be how you are. It should be natural, authentic. And then I also like to tie it, like she did work helping social sector companies implement Peter Drucker's management techniques and philosophies. And one of my favorite Peter Drucker quotes is, the purpose of a business is to create a customer. The things that you all do as business development executives, you know, sales and marketing people, you're the front of the house. Nothing happens until you get a customer created and hopefully repeated. And that's hallowed ground. That's important stuff. Often, you know, if you sit in the board, a lot of tech companies think of people like us as coin operated and replaceable and just purely money driven. And I think there's a whole lot more to it. And we can't forget this. You know, nothing happens until we've got customers in a business. So let me ask a question. Who would tell me what you think your brand is? What does it mean? What does your brand mean?
What other people think about you?
What other people think about you? That's good. Anybody else?
Your values.
Could be your values. Yep. What I think it is what people say about you when you're not around. When someone pings me and asks me about you and you're not there, what do I say? That is your brand in aggregate. And it's when your email shows up in someone's inbox, are they smiling and looking forward to what you have to say and to help you? Or are they cringing and turning their head and not wanting to engage? Like that is your brand that you build up over time. And I would argue it's independent of your company you're working at the time. And I think a lot of people, you know, maybe you're employee number 600 at Google and you worked there for 8 years, you may have been able to ride off of what was on the second half of your email address more than you had to what was on before the @ symbol. And I think in the long run, you have to You have to make that reputation and that brand for yourself. And I think you need to keep it real. You need to make it authentic. Like, anything I'm telling you shouldn't be like a trick or a tool. Like, it may or may not work for you. Yours may be different, but I think it needs to be authentic, and that shows. Like, if it's not, it shows very much as well. I would start off with this seems so simple and not needed to be said, but most people don't do what they say they're going to do. They just don't. And there's a lot of BS and a lot of things promised or said without much meaning behind it. And I think, like, if you just do what you say you're going to do, it will make you stand out from the vast majority of people that you interact with. I'll tell another Kenny story. Is we got together at the old Slice HQ, and we were talking about a few things, and he's like, what do you need? What do you help with? And I mentioned a couple things. I could use a designer, and said something else. He's like, great. He followed up with an email. Here's the 3 people, like, here's exactly what we talked about, happy to intro you. Like, he just did what he said he was going to do. Most people don't. I would just, encourage you to look critically at yourself of whether you're doing this or not, and make it something you aspire to. The other thing I talked a little bit about already, which is you have to look beyond the transaction and the specific ask. Even if you're hoping to sell someone something or work on a particular partnership, even if the answer is no, you have to look beyond just, like, if the answer is no and they're dead to you and you don't think about them, I think it's a very, very short-sighted way to look at this. And what there is an opportunity to do is to add value in everything you do, in every interaction you've got with every company and every person. And it could be something very simple. It could be giving a quick no versus not giving an answer. It could be giving them some information that they don't already have. The whole point is for you to learn about them. Like, every bit of feedback, positive or negative, you can build on to know more about that company or that person. And every interaction is a chance for them to learn about you. So I think that's a really key point to keep in mind. Again, even beyond the actual result of that interaction, whether you think that was positive or not. It's a little side note, but just like, I think, I would, tied into learning is, I would really recommend making reading a habit of what you do. I think the millennial generation is often more looking at headlines or videos, and I think there's less and less people reading. And I believe what Charlie Munger says, my whole life I've known no wise people who didn't read all the time, none, zero. And I read like crazy. To me, it's not always a book. It's most often audible. I'm listening. You can speed it up, listen it 2 times or more. It's very efficient. I don't read long articles on the web. I put them in Pocket. You can do the same thing there, is listen to them. It can, put on your AirPods, and you can crank great information. And I would encourage you to make it a habit. I think it can have a super impact on you in the long term. And on the front, I'll recommend a book that I didn't know about 2 weeks ago. Just read it last week, and I think it's pretty interesting and maybe a little bit profound. It's a woman named Annie Duke wrote it. It's called Thinking in Bets. I came across it. Anyone heard of it? Okay, maybe one. So I think it just came out. I saw it in the Franklin Institute bookstore, so it didn't come across any normal path. But she was a professional poker player for 20 years, and it's not like, I don't play poker. It's not really about that. One of her insights that really struck with me was separating the outcome. Did you win the hand or the tournament, or did you get the deal or make the sale, or was the company a success or not, from the bet you were making along the way, and being very critical and seeing the truth in what was the bet you were making at the time, what was the information you knew, what were the odds, and was it a good bet or not? And then handicapping yourself on how that turned out, but not just on the results, but like, was it a good bet? And thinking of things like, are you getting smarter in your bets over time? And I just found it a super interesting framework that like captured what I've thought about a lot in what I do. And so again, like a suggestion, like if you're going long term, you're thinking about things, I would challenge you to write down your predictions and about things. It could be deals or companies you're involved in, or it could be just things you're observing in the industry. Like, do you think this privacy issue that's hitting Facebook and everybody else is going to be a huge thing, a small thing, go away, long term, short? Like, it'd be interesting to write down your thoughts now and compare them to what actually happens. If you're doing projections in a board deck of what deals you're going to close the next quarter, the next year, that's a projection. I think people often don't hold themselves really accountable to that. The next quarter comes, they kind of forget about that. They talk about what's new. Everything's got the positive spin. It's going to happen, just delayed. Think more critically and be a little bit more brutal and intellectually honest about what's happening and timelines. I'd give it another example too. Sometimes people aren't happy in a job, or they don't know, think they should be looking elsewhere. I would encourage people, like, give yourself a certain point in time by which if you're not happier or if it hasn't worked out by that date, then you will have committed to like looking at it till that point in time, then making a decision, versus you find yourself there giving it another 6 months or a year or whatever, just holding yourself accountable. And I'll tell you like how we do that at First Round. We vote and track everything of every company that comes in. So roughly 3,000 or 4,000 companies a year we meet or come our way, or we know about through at least an email introduction. We probably meet with 1,000 of them. We do work on 300 or 400. We'll probably invite 100 or 150 into partner meetings. We'll end up investing in 30 or 40 per year. And we track everything about those companies, including our own personal and aggregate votes on that company when they come in. And it's not just numeric and you have to be for or against, you can't be neutral. It's also narrative. You're writing down your thoughts. And it's again, a sobering thing to go back, and we're human beings. You go back, every good deal you think you were for, every bad deal you think you voted against, and it's not the case. When you look back, you're like, oh boy, I did like that thing. And I would encourage you to think about your wins and your losses. If I look back on my years in venture capital, I keep a running list. I've had 12 exits where we've made money for our investors, and it was, they were looked at as good investments. I've also have 12 investments where we basically lost everything. We put, in some cases, many millions of dollars into companies, and we lost every bit of it. There's some in the middle, and there's many, many more that are still going. But like, I could look at every one of my losses and I can tell you what I missed. What did I do wrong in that one? And especially things along the way, like when things weren't going right, I knew it, but I wasn't acting on it. And like, it's a good habit to keep yourself honest. Another good suggestion is a thing called how the deal was won. This is something I've seen used inside of some of our companies, where if there's a big win internally, rather than just knowing it, like this is what I call celebrating it in detail with learning opportunities around it. Like write down, our company Bizarre Voice used to do it, that say, we just closed this deal with Urban Outfitters or whoever it was. It was in Salesforce for 375 days. They told us no 6 times. This is the team inside of Bizarre Voice that rose to the occasion and brought it together. We won because of this, and here's our plans for supporting them and expanding the account. It basically like captures and catalyzes the win. It's shared throughout the whole company as a way to celebrate, even with investors, but it's a record for when that next person comes and the next person comes to actually see what happened and learn from it. And so it's a good way to celebrate your function within the organization to keep the profile up. So would recommend you consider that. We have a question? What's the plan? Yep.
You're dealing with a really big data set, and it's very qualitative. How are you analyzing sort of the similarities between wins and losses historically? Because there's a big difference in every single company as well. Or is it really just a case-by-case basis?
I think it's very case-by-case. I think the key is you don't really know when you start tracking, but when you have the data set, you can go back and glean some insight from it. And I'm happy to chat with you off afterwards about more details about how we do it. I think what I would just recommend everybody is when there's a big opportunity, think about it and be tracking what you think is going to happen and then what actually happened, because a lot of people do that. And to me, the goal when there's a big proposal, a company I want to invest in, a deal, like my goal is for me to get to the zone of indifference. That's my term where I've put everything I possibly could into this opportunity. I've done all the work. I've connected with all the people. I've put my best price or whatever it is forward, best terms, and then whatever happens, happens. Like to me, this is another way of saying you made a good bet regardless of what the outcome is going to be. And that there's nothing that you didn't do that you regret that you didn't do if you don't end up getting the deal. Like, so that, to me, that's the place where you want to get yourself to. And that's sort of the big picture. Now I'm going to bring us home with suggestions on how to do emails better and how to connect, on a more granular atomic level. And so I'm talking about you sending emails to important, busy people. The first thing I would argue that you should absolutely do is do the work, meaning show evidence that you actually know something about the person on the other end of that email address or that email. I get tons of inbound from startups that if you boil it down, it was basically like, we're looking for money, you have money, do you want to, can we meet? Without there's really no evidence that they even looked at our website. People come in to ask me for a job. They're looking for a job. They come in, they sit down, it's set up a week or two in advance. We chat, and I say, have you looked at our website? Do you know which companies you might be interested in? Half the time, no, I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I'll do that after I leave. Like, if you're not doing the work up front, like, it's such a disservice. It shows. When you do it, it stands out. Would encourage that. If you're introducing people, the double opt-in, asking permission is something you should absolutely do. I've been into arguments with people who are, senior leaders in New York tech companies who think like, if I send an intro, it should be good enough and you should take it. And I don't think that's the case. I think you do everyone a favor if you do the extra step, ask permission. Simple thing, but subject line matters, meaning I think every subject line should have the name of the person or the company or the concept in it uniquely versus, do you know how many emails are in my inbox with the word intro? Do you know Google, Gmail sorts it by, you're doing yourself a disservice. Another thing, like, don't ever make your resume say resume.doc, right? It should be your name, that kind of thing. Personalized. I would say don't use LinkedIn in mail. Maybe someone's gotten something good. Anyone ever gotten some good connection out of this? All right. Take it with a grain of salt. In my world, this is a morass. It's the lowest quality way to reach out to me, and it's just a lot of noise. Maybe it works for others and you use it, but I still think it's worth doing the work to do a direct email outbound outreach. This is a big deal. I think you do yourself a favor when you're very explicit about what you're looking for in an ask, and everything that person needs to make a decision is in there. Like, if you're a startup, you should send the deck of your company along. If it's looking for a job, your resume or links to relevant things should be there. The opposite of this is, can we grab coffee? I hate that. Or can I buy you coffee? That's even worse than can we have coffee? Or can we get on a call? What for? Like, people who are busy aren't going to have the chance. You want to give them a sense of what you're talking about. Let them decide that it makes sense to go forward. And I think in emails, a self-contained forwardable email is my proposed method of choice, where everything is in there. Like, if you're asking for an introduction, if you're asking me for an introduction, I'll say, send me a self-contained forwardable email with everything that the target person needs to know, and then you send it in your voice to me, and then I can easily, quickly, on my iPhone, flip it to the target with a one-liner of why I think they should consider this. Versus, what many, many people do is, hey, can you intro me to Jeff Bezos? Okay, thanks. And then they actually expect you're going to go do the work and remember to do it and think of how to describe you versus you doing the work, making it easy for someone to help you. Everyone knows what CRM is. I recommend you take your contacts seriously, build them up, keep everything fresh. They should last a lifetime for you, and I would treat it that way. Does anyone know what GTD is? Getting things done. And it's one method of just coming up with a system of like, how are you dealing with all the things in your life? What's important, what's short term, what's long term? And I would suggest you get one of those if you don't have one. I use a tool called Trello. In fact, but we have a new company called Notion that has a beautiful tool that I'm now kind of switching over to. The guy that invented GTD, I met him, something Allen is his name, David Allen. I asked him what he uses. It's folders and paper. So it doesn't have to be tech, but you need a system that you trust that you follow. Big pet peeve of mine. Put your phone number in your email signature. Can't tell you how many times companies I've been excited about, entrepreneurs, I want to call them back, and I don't have their number, and they don't have it in their inbox. In their email, and I can't call them. Make it easy to contact you, and also like put who you are. I get a lot of things from Gmail from very generic sounding names, and I don't remember what company you are, and you don't say it. Like, put a hook so everyone can know who you are. And I'll give you a bonus point. I bet how many of you have a message recorded on your voicemail? That's pretty good. Many people don't, and maybe I'm just old, but it's sometimes like, was that the right number? Like, I don't even know. I'm not going to leave you a message. Like, just say your name. Make it easier for us old guys. And the whole thing is making it easy to help you. You want to do all the work. You want to make it very easy for people to help you. But you also want to make it very easy for them to say no. You want to let people be able to opt out, and I think that makes it a better experience for everybody. Like often when I'm making a request to someone, right up front I say, here's what I'm looking for, here's why. If you can't, no problem. You give them the out right out of the gate. And I think if you're following up with people, a little bonus point is to do the presumptive negative, meaning you've pinged someone, you didn't hear back. You ping them again, you don't hear back. I find a good method is sometimes to do the presumptive negative. You follow up and say, by the way, or you say, I noticed you haven't engaged. It doesn't seem like it's a fit. I just wanted to, confirm I'm going to, take this idea elsewhere. Very often that elicits a fear of missing out in the other side, where they might now engage versus you're just pinging and they're not ready to deal with it at this point. Sometimes it's better just to call that out. So I'll ask this question. How many times should you follow up with someone in an email if you haven't heard back from them? What do you say?
Until you get a response.
So it could be 10 times? 20?
15 to 20. Depends on your
Yeah. Okay. So again, maybe this is one where we're different a little bit. Like my sense is like it's once or twice. Like if you're pinging somebody, and I've got some in my inbox where there's like someone like pinging me like 15 times. There's not a connection, and so but maybe it's different in your world or for you. But like for me, it's like you'd better do the presumptive negative or come back with a different idea, or it's just not a fit. I think at some point it's not serving your brand well. Like you're the guy that pinged me 60 times and I didn't respond.
You have to know it's effective.
You have to know it's effective. You have to personalize everything. Like even if you have a boilerplate of what you're looking for, a one-liner that makes it unique to that person and from you, I think is worth more than a lot of automated spam. Track your response rates. Like of the outbound initiatives you do, what % do you get back? When I do it, my aim is for around 80%. In your world, it might be a lot lower, but like if it's single digits, it's almost like a mass marketer versus a business development executive with good ideas and qualified targets. Like it should be higher. You should be tracking it. And then just the final thought is like to add one extra thoughtful outreach each day. If you've got your getting things done system, you know what's next most important. To do one extra thing, and it could be like an email like Adam Braun sent, runs Pencils of Promise in our company Mission U. He wrote, you have to look it up to read it, the perfect email asking for a donation of $1 million from a Bitcoin billionaire who was giving some money away. And a week later, he got this email apologizing for the delay. I'd love to give you $1 million. 10 minutes later, he had $1 million in his charity's account. That could be that one thoughtful outreach. The other thing could be just be a thank you note, like someone that helped you, a previous business partner, manager, mentor. A simple thank you can just go a long way in cementing and reminding about a relationship, and that's something you can do. If you want to hear more about me, there's a few things. The article, How to Be Insanely Well Connected, was one of our top articles on First Round Review last year. It had 500,000 views. More on the art of the email introduction was in Forbes. How to work a conference, an event like this or others in your industry was the thing I did on LinkedIn that you might read. And then I'll wrap with like a handful of books on the reading theme. We talked about thinking in bets. Anyone read Hard Thing About Hard Things? Very, very good. My favorite is how their investor and friend Ron Conway, at the depths of Opsware LoudCloud, came to New York and told Allen and Company to buy their stock, and it propped up the stock, and they did it. And they named a conference room after Ron back at Opsware. But I love that part of the story. Traction is a book by Gabe Weinberg of DuckDuckGo with different chapters written by different entrepreneurs and executives. I wrote a chapter on business development. People have said it's a good book. You could try it. Shoe Dog, anyone read? Very good, from their early days. And one you might not expect, Steve Martin. He's made the best autobiography of someone who crafted his work and learned from the ground up and tracked everything and worked like a maniac. It's just kind of inspiring to know where he came from and what he built it up to and how he did it. So that is my talk. Thanks for all your attention today.